Good day and welcome to our complimentary webinar, which is brought to you in partnership with Auscontact's national silver sponsor, Genesys. It's entitled Workforce Engagement and AI, Humanising AI Technology to Drive Employee Engagement. Over the next hour, with the help of today's special guests, Cameron Smith, Senior Director, Product Management, Workforce Engagement Management at Genesys, and Andy Hardy, Strategic Director, Employee Engagement at Genesys. We know we're actually going to have you totally engrossed in the conversation, as well as spark your interest. And don't forget, there is going to be a Q&A at the end of the session. I'm Fiona Keogh, CEO of Auscontact and your moderator for today's webinar. While we're waiting for everyone to join us, let's use the time wisely to run through some housekeeping with you. Remember, it's really important to interact to get the maximum benefit. And as you know, there's no need to take too many notes because we'll be providing you with the slides and recording of the webinar. To interact with us, please use the questions pane on the control panel. You can ask questions or make comments for Cameron, Andy, or myself from time to time. Remember, we will have a full Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so if you're anything like me, I need to type those questions as I go along, or else I'm going to forget to ask them. I know that many of you are familiar with asking questions, but let's just try out the questions pane on the control panel now, just in case. And the trick question for today is Australia, i.e. the Socceroos, still in the FIFA World Cup? It's a yes or no answer. Let's see how many crazy followers of the Socceroos we've actually got there. Well, Manelli and Robin and John have all got the correct answer. Jenny knows the answer and she's got a frowny face emoticon. So Jenny's not happy. Oh, Carol knows the answer. Dave knows the answer. Another Dave knows the answer. So Leah also knows the answer. So guys, the answer is no. So it looks like everyone that's here actually, oh, and John's actually said as with Germany. So it looks like we might have a Germany fan on today as well. So the answer is no, and we all know how to use the questions pane on the control panel. That's fantastic. So a little bit more housekeeping. If you're listening through headphones or speakers and experience any issues with your internet connection, please note that on the control panel, you can click to switch to the telephone. The toll-free number for your location, the access code and PIN will appear on the screen for you to dial, or you can raise your virtual hand and the Auscontact team will rush to your aid. So with that, I'm very pleased to welcome a couple of brand new voices, Cameron Smith and Andy Hardy from Genesys. And I believe it's over to you, Cameron.
Fantastic, Fiona. Thank you. And just to confuse everyone as we talk about this topic today, so I'm the Australian speaker, but I'm actually based in the US, and Andy's originally from the UK. But he's currently based in Melbourne in Australia. So it's going to sound a little bit odd, and obviously as the Australian, it does feel great to be actually talking to fellow Australians and talking about obviously the contact center industry and workforce engagement as a wider topic. We're going to have an interesting topic today. Please feel free to ask a lot of questions as we go. We will touch on a lot of different topics. A lot of them hopefully will get you thinking about the future and more importantly, get you thinking about what that actually means to your organisation. And ultimately what it actually means to your employees, which is clearly the most important topic of the day. So let's get stuck into it. So when we talk about engagement, we talk about employee engagement, we're really talking about, you know, the employee's level of psychological investment in their organisation. And we'll go into a little bit of a study around employee engagement, but we honestly do believe at Genesys that we can actually what customer engagement actually means and what, you know, customer engagement environment really is, and making sure that those employees are prospered through their development, but also through their performance and rewarding them with the right behaviours and the right skills, and more importantly, giving them access to capabilities that they historically haven't had, things like workforce flexibility and terms like that. So we want to make sure that we help organisations grow into those challenges, and we know topics like attrition are a huge issue within the contact center environment, sort of worldwide. And at Genesys, we really do believe that we can obviously help our customers and, more importantly, help the employees prosper in those environments. Talking about engagement, and this is a study that Aon Hewitt do, and I highly recommend you reach out to the Aon Hewitt website. And if you Google Aon Hewitt employee engagement, there's a free report there that talks about employee engagement across countries and regions, but also drills into things like verticals and other elements. They surveyed 8 million employees last year, and they've been doing this study for the last 5 or 6 years. What's a scary number that comes out of that survey is that the 8 million people that responded, 62% of them said that they were actively disengaged with their employer. That's a scary, scary number when you start to think about 2 out of 3 workers are not really engaged with you. And in summary feedback, Aon talk a little bit about, okay, what were the top things that the employees felt that they were lacking? So things like feedback and direction from their manager, socialisation of their peers, being able to understand the connection between themselves and what value they're adding to the company. Obviously incomplete or incorrect onboarding processes, meaning that they felt a little bit lost, and also that ability to actually properly communicate between the manager and employees. And this was global, and this was obviously across a lot of different verticals and a lot of different employee types. But when you think about it from a customer engagement perspective, you really can sort of link some of these elements back into the software and obviously the tools that the employees have today. So we're talking a little bit about that today. We're talking a little bit about the focus areas and really where the market's going and how people are actually using the software that we have today and we'll have tomorrow in the future. At Genesys, obviously, we're very, very much focused in on driving that employee engagement. We honestly do believe that there is a huge uptake in those engagement features and more importantly, engagement capabilities, and putting more and more control in the hands of the actual individual workers. And we're seeing that when we start to do customer profiling and employee profiling around different generations. Obviously, we've got a lot of millennials coming into the workforce. They want that flexibility. They want the ability to be able to use a workforce management tool and come home early or go home late or decide at 7 o'clock in the morning that, hey, I don't really want to start at 9 o'clock today. I want to start at 10:30. They want that flexibility and they want that information, and they're used to having things like mobile devices and having used to information in a constant stream. So they're not fearing of that information being available to them. So we really are working towards how do we drive more and more engagement through those capabilities, and also starting to get really, really smart about how we approach that. The traditional workforce optimization market has been heavily focused in on things like manual capabilities and focusing in heavily on automation, optimization, sorry. And we do honestly believe that there is a lot of we can do there around AI and automation. We're going to talk about some of those today as we go through. When we look sort of more globally and try and look across a lot of our customer bases, Genesys, we obviously engage with our customers a lot around feedback and obviously spend a lot of time interacting with them on a survey perspective. These are some of sort of the outcomes that we're seeing just sort of globally across the regions, and it doesn't really change depending on the region. Obviously, user experience is really, really critical. 92% of our respondents to our blind study said that user experience workforce engagement is even more critical because it needs to be understandable, it needs to be consistent, and more importantly, needs to be intuitive. We're seeing a lot of interest from HR buyers, and we've seen that over the last couple of years as engagement's taking off and as those systems of things like learning management systems and more so the HR systems themselves get tighter and closer together with the contact center. We are seeing more and more interest coming in from the HR buyers. So now we're getting into things like career development plans and journey management of an employee's career coming into the contact center software. And historically, that's been out of that contact center environment, but we're seeing the need to actually bring those pieces of capability to a lot closer to the sort of core of the work. But we understand that things like optimization are lost. And when we asked our survey respondents about how much of your contact center cost relates back to labour, the average number was around 72%. So, you know, three quarters of the cost that's currently running in your contact center is around the actual physical labour. And obviously, as an organisation, there's a lot of key focus there. On top of that, we obviously also have a shifting market, and the needs of the employees is also changing. And I've been speaking to a lot of people about recruitment recently, and really trying to dig into, what are the things that people are looking for from a recruitment perspective. And one of the huge shifts we've actually seen in North America, especially, is that the employee, the potential recruit, is demanding, especially for contact center roles, access to certain systems. You've got potential employees actually asking them about, okay, what's your coaching program? How will you develop me? What's the career path that you'll provide? And we're seeing that that shift in the employee, the potential employee, actually being one of the people actually cementing some of those demands. And also things like automation and AI, there's been a very sharp focus and a big focus on customer service. And obviously that's been a core focus of Genesys for quite a while. But we believe that the employee can also benefit from that explosion, and starting to look at things. How do we use things like chatbots, for example, and robotic process automation to really drive efficiency at the employee side? For areas probably a little bit around Australia, but also hugely important to markets like Europe, for example, items like MiFID and II and GDPR, which is around obviously the management of complex data and, more importantly, personal data. And that does create some complexity in these environments, and we understand and we appreciate that a lot of customers are after that secure environment. We need to make sure that obviously we make that available to them. When we talk about Genesys, and more importantly, what's available from the workforce engagement platform, obviously we're serving three sorts of customers. We've obviously got our pure cloud customers. We've also got customers who are from our interactive intelligence on the pure Connect platform. And then obviously we have the larger pure engage enterprise platform, which is more for your larger sort of customers. When we look across the workforce engagement platform, a lot of these same elements are available across a big swag of those platforms. So when we start to think about things like onboarding people, looking at things like assessment, getting into elements like personal development and career planning, all the way through to looking at hiring plans, decisions around what you should do with those hiring plans, recruitment processes, bringing in some of the testing that you would do to look at a potential new recruit, and then folding that all the way through into sort of your traditional WFO elements around things like forecasting, scheduling, managing of training resources, reporting, QM, and obviously speech and text analytics. And what they do is they effectively create an environment that allow organisations to be able to move between these core capabilities really quite seamlessly. So how do I move my conversational analysis? How do I get it from where it is in that instance? And how do I transform that into things like coaching or effectively assessments or knowledge that we want to push to the employees? And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Andy, and Andy's going to dig into a little bit of the current capabilities. And then at the end, we'll talk about what the impacts of AI will be to that environment.
Cool, thanks.
Over to you, Andy.
I should have control. Hang on. Let me just try.
You should. Sure.
Sorry, guys, just getting control of the slides. I'll put on my best Australian accent since it seems I'm sitting in Melbourne and not the north of England. Like, I have the power cam. Maybe you need to progress for.
Okay, I'll draft for you, Andy. Just let me know.
Okay, thank you. So just, stick on this one for a while. So all I've done here, guys, I just wanted to talk you through in Cam's previous diagram in the center circle. He had these 6 different stages, and I just wanted to take you through a bit of a scenario and an example of how this happens in the real world now. And when you looked at the previous diagram, you may have looked at that and thought, you know what, we already do this part, or we do bits of this, or you know we do all of this. But what we find with an organisations is it's very siloed. You'll have a team of people who concentrate on recruitment and getting those bums on seats, if you like, and then you'll have the learning and development team who'll maybe look at the onboarding process, and then there's that ongoing development piece, which is probably done by maybe team leaders or team coaches. And then you've got the planning team who are working out how do we schedule all these people for these things that they need to do to develop and grow. And there's all of these different steps that happen within organizations today, but that they're usually in silo. Maybe one or two are connected, but actually there's no connected journey. And the big thing that Genesys offer is to connect these pieces together and connect these dots together to actually make the employee experience much richer and continue from the moment they join, all the way through their development and their life within your organization. And that, I just wanted to use one example. There's obviously many different ways and things that you can use this approach for, but I just wanted to give one example of how this might work. So I'll quickly go into each one of these steps. So Cam, if you can just flip forward for me. Okay, so if we just look at, there we go. If we just look at recruitment first and how recruitment works, I think when you look at your business and you look at who you're recruiting, and I still hear today, and I've only heard recently in the last couple of weeks, we just need to get bums on seats. We need to just get people in because that's what we're recruiting for, and then we'll develop them. But the risks and challenges with that are, are they the right people? Have they got the right profile you're looking for? Is your attrition levels just going to be higher than before because you're bringing these people in who maybe don't have the right profile and right skills to actually do the job in the first place? So when you talk around recruitment and we look at this, we think if we know what good looks like within our business, and we know for our top performing people within a business area, this is the type of profile we need. This is the type of skill set we're looking for. And if we utilize that within recruitment and actually use that to understand the candidates that are coming through, we can start to be much more, I guess, choosy in the people that we're wanting to bring in, because we know we've got a better chance of success with those people than investing all that money in onboarding and things and then losing them because it's not quite right for them. But I think more importantly around this as well is actually internal recruitment, and the people within your business at the moment, they're all working in their individual departments, and CAM's statistics of 62% of people are feeling disengaged within an organization at the moment. Well, you know what, part of that issue is, are they actually working in the best department for their skill set, or the best department for what they actually want to do? And if you look at your team now and you say, right, we want to recruit another 20 salespeople into a business, let's go to the recruitment team to try and do that. Actually, if you can understand what the profile looks like of your existing teams today and where their skills and strengths and their knowledge and experience lies, then you can start to really optimize your internal workforce. And I think gone are the days where, one of the team leaders says, oh, I've got a gun salesperson over here, maybe you should use him. Well, that's fine, but you're going to be missing so much opportunity in your business. So recruitment is a real key area around employee engagement, not just from external people coming in, but also people within your organization as it is now. Now, what's also interesting here is once you go from recruitment, it is actually the handshake, and I'll use the word handshake a few times, but the handshake from recruitment to the onboarding process. And being able to say, you know what, if you just jump to the next slide, Cam, being able to say, from an onboarding perspective, we now know when we've gone through this profile matching in recruitment, we know where these strengths and weaknesses are of those people. So we can now start to tailor the onboarding process to focus in on the areas where we believe these new candidates need the most help and most support. So actually being able to build this phased onboarding approach to be able to say, you know what, for Andy, I really need to concentrate on my selling skills, but actually my building rapport with a customer or my behavioral skills are really strong. So I need to focus and start to do different things with different candidates and different employees, but making it personal for the individual. And that's again back to the employee engagement and really making the employees feel like they're having their hand held through this journey to get the best possible outcome for them. And there's obviously lots of tools that sit around this that let us be able to map this out into these phases to be able to clearly see at what level our employees are, and maybe more importantly, where we need to give them extra help and support through that onboarding process. Cam, if you just move on. And then once someone's gone through onboarding, we call it kind of license to serve or certifying these employees to say, you know what, you've just done 3 weeks worth of learning. We want to make sure you've got the absolute core knowledge and core skills to be ready to talk to your customers. And we do that, and then the employees, then we make sure they're ready and we pass them over to the operations, and the team leaders take over, and then they start taking calls from customers, and there's monitoring and things like that happen around that. And, there's lots of different stages of monitoring, whether, if the employee has knowledge, that's great, but are they actually using it with their customers? And are they having them conversations with the customers correctly? And, you've got your quality management teams who start to look at that. And there's many different stages of quality management, as I'm sure you all know, from, you've got some call recordings and a team of people sit down and listen to, 1, 2, 3% of conversations that are happening with customers, which is obviously very restrictive, because the chances of being able to find that needle in a haystack of where that agent needs additional help is so difficult in that process. And then, the next stage of that is there's interaction analytics solutions out there at the moment that will analyze all of the conversations with the customer, whether that be chat or whether that be voice conversations or whatever that is. And using that analysis tool, I've used some kind of rudimentary numbers here, but if you're using analysis tools like that, the systems will be able to identify, maybe 80% of those conversations with customers or those interactions with customers were successful. Actually, we're identifying 20% that maybe need some more attention. And that's great, because actually what you're starting to do is really start to focus in with your quality analysis work. But actually, within Genesys, we want to take that a step further, because the system identifying that there may be something that you need to concentrate on is fine. But Tam, if you just click forward just 2 or 3, if you look across the bottom here, and it's interaction analytics and QM. So in this first instance here, when we're looking at the 20% of flag calls, we take the data from interaction analytics, and it starts to identify, this person has some fairly good strength in soft skills, needs a little bit of help in process, good in system, a little bit lower in compliance. But we actually merge that together with skills and knowledge, and through the tools we have to understand, do they actually have the knowledge in these areas as well? And we match that exactly to the call drivers that they're taking. And then even further, we link that through to their actual performance, and we correlate and merge all of this together, which actually then drives an action. And off the back of this action can be automated. So in this scenario for advisor A, it's identified a couple of areas where there's a process issue, and the trigger and the system will automate this process to say, we need to give this person a deeper dive knowledge assessment around process, because we think we've identified a problem. Or it could be that we need to automatically push and schedule through workforce management, automated. We need to push this knowledge assessment out to them, or a piece of learning, we call them knowledge nudges, but a nugget of learning, if you like, to try and close that gap. But in that instance alone, for advisor A, it's not just about what's happened with the quality score. It's not just about what's happened with the knowledge or whether their KPIs are low. It's actually a combination of all of these things that is the real trigger that should be driving what the next stage is. Click one more. And in this example, I've got advisor B here, same sort of scenario, but you can see across the bottom, really low in compliance for advisor B, and still low in process. The trigger here might be, actually, we want to do more of a deep dive QM and spend a little bit more time listening to Andy's calls, because we think he maybe has some sort of an issue, whereas Cameron's conversation seems to be going okay. We're just going to push him a little bit of learning or a little bit of a nudge or whatever that may be. What that allows us to do, if we just click one more, Cam, is there we go. It allows us to really focus into the wedge and really pick a wedge of, out of those 100% of interactions, actually 4% is really the critical area where we should be spending most of our time and focusing the most attention. And just by doing that, it really helps drive real engagement and real development of people, that they feel like it's personal to them and they feel like they're getting the growth that they need. If we jump on to the next slide, and how this kind of merges over to, and it's just a quick slide here of how this merges over to an assessment perspective. If you ask yourselves the questions, do you understand who your top performers are? Well, the chances are you probably do. All organisations know from a KPI perspective who their top performers are. They can see the sales figures, they can see the handle times, they can see the net promoter scores. That's fine. Do you understand what makes them great? Is a more challenging question. Why is Cameron really, really good and Andy not so good when they've had the same training, they've been in the same course, they've got the same tenure? How do we focus in and fix that? And then the question of how do you replicate this capability and effectively coach and train your people? You know, it's an area that we take a great deal of pride in being able to help you through these stages to really understand what does that blueprint look like of a great performer, and then how do we match that against other people in our business? And just one more click, Cam. The kind of output of this is it's about action. There's many insight solutions out there in the marketplace that give you insight, but it's about being able to take action and being able to start to automate that development of employees by really understanding where we should be concentrating our time. Just on again, Cam. I just wanted to give you a quick example of an organisation that we've worked with recently, just so you can see a little bit of how this might work in the real world with your companies. This is a very large organisation with 20,000+ employees. This was done within one of their business, one area of their business units. And what they wanted to do is to really understand from their business partners who they're working with at the moment, where's the strengths and weaknesses at with their outsourced partners? You know, they're providing all of this training, all of these millions of dollars worth of investment in developing those outsourcers to be as good as their internal teams, but they're getting very inconsistent results. So they wanted to really understand from a development perspective, where do we need to really be focusing our time? And just to give you an example, if we talk through the three charts on the right here, you've got a low performing agent, and within Genesys we managed to really pinpoint exactly where their gaps are, and then you've got a higher performing agent and where their strengths are, but also where their gaps are. And when you look at the two there, these agents are taking exactly the same call. So when you start to drill into that and you start to think, well, you've had the development, but some are really lower than others, and we can really now start to see why and see where we need to be focusing our attention. And that's just two agents. When you lift that up to across the whole centres, it's obviously much more valuable from a strategic perspective. You see in the middle chart a kind of average view of where knowledge and capability and skills were across the centres, and it was averaging at just over 50%. Again, a massive risk to that whole, the risk of someone calling a call centre, and depending on which agent they get, depends on whether they get the right answer or not, and calling back might get a different answer. It's very visible with things like this. And then across the bottom there, the chart just shows a distribution across centres. So how, if we're looking at 4 different centres in this example, these blue dots represent agents' skill and capability. And the variance between centre A, I think that shows real inconsistency in the way that they're developing their people and engaging their people in learning. And maybe the one on the right in centre D, that they're maybe not as strong as some of the others, but it's much more consistent. And this insight is really valuable for you to be able to drive and make improvements moving forward within your organisation. Just finally, Cam, last 2 slides, and then I'll stop. I just talked a little bit about how do we take all this intelligence and all this artificial intelligence and machine learning and driving development and linking that through to things like your workforce management system. How do we, being able to automate that journey and being able to start to automate when do we take these people offline, when's the best time to give them that development, to schedule them for that classroom learning, maybe it's the best time to give them e-learning or buddy sessions. Being able to optimize that journey, it really starts to do this handshake and this connection between everything from the recruitment through to onboarding and then onto the operations and then the analysis, deep dive into capability, and then through to this planning and whether it's linking to WFM or whether it's linking to things like our IWD solutions, back office solutions. All of this journey is all completely connected, and I think that's a really powerful thing that allows you to get the best possible outcome. And you know what? Already got parts of this journey, then that's okay. You maybe already have solutions that do parts of this, but allow Genesys to look and help you start to connect these dots a little bit further is kind of the message from it. And then the final slide is, I guess, one of the most important things is how do we link that back through to the customer experience? And within Genesys, we have the ability to link all of this journey actually back through to routing and to skills-based routing and to the new predictive routing solutions that Genesys offer today, to make sure, are we connecting exactly the right agent with the customer at exactly the right time. And when we understand all of these profiles, we really have that opportunity to do that and start to really optimize customers coming into your centres and giving them the best possible outcome based on the profile and DNA that we've made. So that's kind of the end of my slides. I just wanted to just take you through one journey, one example of how these things connect together. But hopefully that's stuff that's here today, and that's maybe something that of interest to you, is how we can help. So with that, I'll pass back over to Cam, and he'll take us into some more of the other exciting stuff that we offer.
Fantastic, thanks, Andy. So yes, I think it's actually really good that we talk about this slide, because this is really sort of the start of where AI really starts to come to the fore. On the left-hand side, we have today, and obviously we have groups of people, and we allocate them skills, and we put them on certain queues to work, and really we use an IVR to define, or have the customer help us define what their intent is. And typically, when we make that decision, the customer comes through and they choose billing, for example, and we say, yep, cool, you need to get routed through to the billing queue, and then obviously we send that through. And we might be smart enough, we might do things like proficiency ranking, and we might route our calls based on those ranks, and those ranks are obviously derived from KPIs that we've resolved in the future. But ultimately, we're really not in control of which customer gets to which employee, and more importantly, we're not in control of what the outcome would be, and at best it would be a best guess. The introduction of AI, and on the Genesys side, we introduced predictive routing in the middle of the year, really does change that dynamic completely. So now we're actually looking at the customer, and we're creating a profile around that customer. And we're also, as Andy said, taking all the information that we've got from all those previous steps and creating a profile around the employee. So now when we're making this routing decision, we're looking at the intent, but we're also looking at the customer's profile, and we're making that match to an employee profile that we know will drive whatever the business outcome is that we're after. So if we're interested in things like sales conversion, or interested in things like first call resolution, we can absolutely target down the customer and employee down to the individuals and make that routing decision in real time. And that nets some amazing benefits. We've seen things like 12% first call resolution improvements in less than 6 weeks across a large customer in Canada who's a telco. And we've seen some other benefits like 6 points in NPS in a couple of weeks, just from being able to change the way our interactions work, and more importantly, understanding more information around the employee. And to do that, you need to then go all the way back to looking at things like your knowledge and assessments and understanding exactly how people are performing. It can't simply be just, what's that person's AHT today? You need to look at a whole raft of different information to be able to make that available. So let's talk a little bit about product development and really sort of where it's going. And at Genesys, we launched Kate, our AI platform, nearly 18 months ago now. And that platform really is there to really sort of harvest and bring together all the AI technology that Genesys brings before, but also be able to leverage AI technology that's coming from other vendors. So getting access to, for example, things like IBM's Watson, for example, or some of the work that Google's doing around Google Home and some of those instances is actually really, really important. So Genesys have acknowledged that, and also have made sure that we've built a platform that enables those AI services that either come from us or come from other companies that you wish to use, and bring them together to really sort of drive understanding of language, understanding of obviously customers' dialogue, and things like next best action, for example, around their intent, but also understanding the behaviours of not just the customer, but also the employee, and how we bring those sort of AI services together. And we do that on top of data models that really reflect your organisation. So we have data models around your customer, we have data models around obviously the journeys the customers are on, and we're doing this across all the channels, all the omni channels around your environment, and really focusing back in on those individual interactions and the employees. And this platform really does allow us to then create a really solid foundation for us to really accelerate a lot of our AI thinking. And obviously, we spoke a little bit about predictive routing. That's available today. Customers are welcome to get stuck into predictive routing. We're currently offering a review for someone to come in and actually do a review of your environment, and we would actually show you what the benefit will be of predictive routing before we even deploy it, which is actually quite cool. And also by making sure that we've got the right framework so that you can bring in more information. So more information around your customers, more information around your employees. Maybe you want to bring in things like your HR data and look at people's salaries, for example. Is salaries having an impact on performance? Are the people who are getting paid the most from an hourly wage perspective the ones who are driving the biggest benefit? So the platform really is there to really bring and consolidate a lot of these AI services together. And really, from a Genesys perspective, really is the platform moving forward for a lot of our development. On the workforce engagement side, it really is around continuously analysing that workforce performance and making sure that we've got a really good handle on the employee and understanding where their strengths and weaknesses are, and more importantly, proactively reaching out to either the employee directly or via a coach or a supervisor, things that we can do to try and improve their performance. And that's done at a personalised level, so it's done at an individual level. And then obviously using that information to really create some really dynamic and predictive modelling around what we expect the performance to be. And that allows us to look at things like, for example, is the employee going down a churn path? Because we can now understand what their journey is that the employee is going on. And we're doing a little bit of research around can we actually predict that the employee is actually going to churn or actually leave your organisation? And some of our early tests signify that we could potentially know that they're going to leave your organisation with about 4 or 5 months notice. So if you start to think about that a little bit, if you're aware and the system's actually identifying that people potentially are leaving and these are the reasons why, you can actually remediate that a lot quicker than what you would expect to be able to do and actually change the course of what was potentially going to happen for that employee. This AI platform is part of a wider ecosystem, and all the little boxes here that you see on the screen are all AI-driven capabilities that are coming out of Genesys today. So mainly when we talk about the orange circle in the middle, a lot of that has to do with how we engage the workforce. Things like predictive routing, obviously engaging how the employees receive customers from a routing perspective. The voice of the customer has a solid impact into obviously the performance of the person, but even things like recruitment training, automatic process discovery, performance management, forecasting and scheduling, they're all being injected with elements of AI. And when we look across the wider Genesys platform, every sort of product that you see here has an AI element already, and potentially will be having more AI elements added to it in the near future. So it really is this sort of merge of human and machine coming through this sort of blended environment, where we've got customers obviously interacting with your business, and we've got employees helping those customers where the machine cannot help those customers. But then more importantly, we're leveraging things like HR systems and CRM systems to really sort of bring those two together and create that seamless environment between human and machine. Let's dig into some of the sort of elements that we're focusing on from a workforce engagement perspective. So as I said earlier, we do know that Alan Hewitt has said that 62% of our workers are disengaged. And we do honestly believe that we can help with that. We know that when we talk to customers about things like attrition, in some industries, in some verticals, in some regions, it can be as high as 60. I spoke to a customer about 6 weeks ago, and he said that his attrition was sort of bordering on the 85, 90% mark. That's basically every person leaving every year, and that's expensive. That's expensive to manage. It's expensive to operate, and more importantly, we can sort of start to uncover the reasons why by looking at that. And it's not just exactly for the employees; it's also for their supervisors. So how do we bring the whole organisation forward in terms of their capabilities, and how do we make sure that our coaches are effective, that our QM people are more effective, that our workforce planners are more effective, and all of them working together in a much richer, much more AI and automated driven ecosystem of tools to really sort of create those environments. So when we start to talk about employee engagement, a lot of our focus areas this year really are looking at how do we improve that assessment? How do we understand even more about staff capabilities? How do we bring in more knowledge and more data around the employee? And can we actually leverage some predictive models around the employee behaviour? And then using a lot of that information to really accelerate some of the dynamic coaching that we're doing. So while we can understand today that Andy might be short in terms of process improvement, and we need to send him down a process improvement path. Being dynamic about, okay, so let's send Andy down this training, and we know that once Andy's done that, we're going to get X or Y result. If we get an X result, this is what needs to happen. And actually creating that complete end-to-end development plan for Andy really is where we want to try and get to that, and really start to help the supervisors and the coaches, more importantly, actually understand what's the employee actually really need here, and then more importantly, using that, using the technology that's available to really help guide the supervisor through that process. And instead of the supervisor either guessing or just trying out certain things until something works. We know that common interface is a continual concern, and obviously that's also an important factor for us right now as well. On the automation side, we really are sort of branching out into and really creating some challenging conversations and environments for a lot of our customers. We start to think about things like workforce planning and the ability to do a forecast or a schedule. We're on the very, very verge of being able to automate that. Genesys are rolling out their new forecasting algorithm for WFM in Q3 this year, and we're really looking forward to rolling out with that. And we will have the ability today to actually end-to-end automate that. If you imagine your workforce planners today sitting down, crunching numbers, trying to work out what the call volumes will be in 3 weeks from now, we really do have, and the maths and the machine learning and the AI has accelerated so much, and really we can actually do that in a very automated way. And we realize that not a lot of customers are actually ready for that full automation. So we'll be releasing the products, we'll be showing people how it works, we'll be very transparent about the mathematics and how we've applied to that. What that will mean is instead of doing 1 forecast model or 2 forecast models, we'll be running through hundreds of thousands of different models and presenting them back to the workforce plan to really show them exactly what's going to be happening with their call volumes over time. And we're doing the same with scheduling. So if you start to think about scheduling, how do I manage things like overtime, and how can I do overtime in an automated way? And will I allow my systems, for example, to process overtime on my behalf with very, very little involvement at all from a workforce planning perspective? So things like quality management, and Andy touched on a little bit earlier, listening to 2 or 3 or 4% of your calls, that's great, but statistically, you really are missing out on the bigger picture. So if you're looking at things like speech analytics, one of the elements that we can bring to this is the ability to start scoring some of those calls in an automated way. And as an organisation, you may be looking at, okay, I just want to do partial scoring, so maybe I just want to do 3 or 4 of my questions on my form. But maybe, and some organisations are quite bravely saying, you know what, I'm going to let the machine automatically score nearly the whole form. And what we're seeing here is you're saying now, okay, instead of doing quality management over things like 2 or 3 or 4% of your calls, now we're looking at 15, 16, 20%, and in some instances, depending on how you design your form, up to 100% of your interactions being quality scored. And that changes the way quality management works. It changes the way the quality management process works as well, which creates some really interesting dynamics when we start talking to customers about how that actually works. On the employee side, same rules apply. So we're looking at more things, more mobility means that the employees have more control, and more importantly, they're after that control. So having the employee mark themselves sick and not having to notify the team leader, but more importantly, the workforce management platform actually responding to the fact that Andy's noted himself sick today, and then making changes and adjustments to the workforce plan without really anyone really having to do too much effort. That's where the market's going. That's where a lot of the products are going, and really sort of driving that efficiency and getting humans to really sort of work on the focus of areas and freeing up their time to work on obviously coaching people and guiding people through a process. On the AI side, just some of the call outs. So obviously as the technology continues to improve and it's a rapidly developing market, it's very different than it was 6 months ago. It's very different than it was a year and a half ago. We start getting into, okay, how do we understand the employee skills and how do we then consume even larger data sets around the employee? And we're starting to get into things like, when we start to get into things like gamification, seeing if employees actually want to connect things like their Facebook account to their work account, so that we can actually look at, what sort of likes, what music do they like, what brands do they follow, and does that have a relationship with how they perform really getting into some of the sort of the deeper insights. And we're seeing a lot of interest from a lot of organisations around understanding how people work and how people behave. Spoke a little bit about real-time assistance a little bit early on, but how do we now provide real-time guidance to the employee? Can we actually create an environment where we have a coach who basically sits with the employee the whole time? That coach, however, is a machine, and that coach is actively listening to all the conversations that are happening between the customer and the employee, and making some real-time suggestions on what the employee should do, surfacing the right knowledge, reminding the employee to read out a compliance script, reminding the employee that the customer that they have on their phone had an NPS score of 3 last time they called, and to make sure that we get another survey from them. Maybe they're due for a campaign or for an offer. These are some of the elements that we start to think about when you think about interaction guidance. Relating back to interaction analytics, and more importantly, the link back to workforce management, interaction analytics processes those interactions, and we understand what's the content of those interactions inside the call. And that's actually very, very important information when we start to think about workforce planning and the workforce process. So we can take a lot of that information and we can use that to then adjust and model out the forecast, and more importantly, the scheduling to optimize those outcomes. So we're going to quickly arrive, and honestly, I'll probably see it probably in the next sort of 6 to 9 months, where we are using the information that's coming from speech analytics in our workforce planning tools, and automatically adjusting our forecast, and automatically reaching out to employees for overtime, and automatically making those adjustments with really very little human effort, apart from setting up the rules in the first instance. For the most part, you can actually let the system go and drive itself to the outcomes that you've already defined. So a couple of other sort of AI focuses. I spoke a little bit about employee assist, and again, coaching and providing that sort of training and recommendation engine is really something that we're really focused in, and how can we drive that efficiency when it comes to development of people. Obviously, we spoke a little bit about workforce management automation, and obviously challenging those traditional practices that are sitting in front of Excel and crunching massive Excel spreadsheets to try and work out how many calls you've got coming into your centre tomorrow. And then really linking that back with predictive routing and bringing all of that information to the fore, so that you can then start to use that from a routing strategy perspective, really is sort of the key focus areas for us right now. And with that, I will wrap it up, and just in time for hopefully some good questions. So Fiona, back to you.
Thanks, Cameron. Thanks, Andy. So no one's typed any questions at the moment, and I think that's possibly because there was a lot of content. So what I would take from this at the moment, and the question that I have for you, there may be a number of, in particular, workforce planners sitting on the webinar. Should they panic?
No, they shouldn't panic. They shouldn't panic at all. I think what we're trying to do here is actually free up their time. And many moons ago, I spent a little bit of time working at Medigo in private, and spent a lot of that time as a workforce planner. And it's a busy job, and there is a lot to get done. And really, what it is about, it's actually about removing some of those mundane tasks. You know, if I do really need 15 people to do overtime this afternoon, do I really need to calculate that? Can the system actually work that out for me? And more importantly, can the system work out which people need to go and do that? Those things are capable today, and we can sort of refresh, I guess, workforce planning to being sort of remove those sort of traditional practices and actually allow people to actually do what they are very good at, which is trying to find and trying to squeeze out the next best opportunity they can get from their contact centers. So it's about freeing people up, I think, for the most part. It's not about taking over the jobs or anything like that. No.
To be honest, Sandy, just to give a quick example of that, we did a study, a large telco, around how much time is spent manually adding in exceptions to people's schedules for offline activity, as an example. So when we talked earlier about, you know, we've identified people need to receive some training or development, and how much time is a scheduler, who's a well-trained scheduler, actually just manually going in and just clicking buttons to put exceptions in. And it was around about a third of the scheduler's time is just processing stuff. And you know what, to be able to free that time up for them to be able to start looking at creating even better, smarter, efficient schedules, and being able to look at the analysis of the results. And it's a really powerful thing to be able to free them up from just that manual day-to-day stuff. And that's a lot of the things that we're starting to see right now.
Fantastic. So we do have a couple of questions that have come in. So I thought we'd prompt some thought. That's great. So Jenny, I mean, I have a list, but it's better to hear from the people that are attended. So Jenny would like to know, do you think the predictive routing can work in smaller centres, or will the best employees receive a higher number of calls?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and yeah, there is a bit of a flaw. So at the moment, sort of the minimum is about 100 people. Once you get under 100 people, it actually gets really, really tough. And as the numbers get diminished, you actually drive a scenario where your best employee gets all the phone calls, and that's great because you're obviously targeting the right outcome. But if you start to think about things like occupancy, and more importantly, burnout from an employee perspective, it can become a real problem. So predictive routing definitely is for those sort of organisations that do have sort of more than 100 people sitting across a certain interaction type, because yeah, it can be a challenge as we get into those smaller groups. Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, and I think you're right. You know, balancing the best employee with burnout is incredibly important. You know, especially when you mentioned the organisation that had between 85 and 90% turnover. I was starting to try and do the maths in my head. You know, with a minimum cost to find a new recruit and to onboard them being in excess of $25,000, that certainly starts to add up. It's a bucket load of money, a bucket load. Yeah, frightening numbers.
It's actually really interesting. So, I want to talk a little bit about predictive routing. When we first piloted and when we first started doing our first deployments, the big fear is that you've got these amazing employees and they are the superstars and the absolute rock stars of your business. Will I drive them to the point of no return when it comes to things like occupancy? So one of the abilities we do with predictive routing is when we deploy that is we actually start to look at the interactions themselves and actually start to inject break times actually intraday, intra-call even, between one interaction and the other, really to sort of control that occupancy. Because what you don't want is you don't want your superstars running at 100% occupancy. It's just going to burn them out. So it's all about the balance, and we tune and we tweak that as we go. But more importantly, the predictive engine can actually understand that a little bit more and actually control that real time as well to manage that flexibility.
Fantastic. So we've got a question from Nina, and Nina would like to know and I love these questions. So when they come in, could she ask what is the typical lead time for setting the system up in an organisation?
Yeah, I think it very much does come down to obviously organisational complexity. Depending on the products that you're interested in, I mean, and I'll take just a 250-seat contact centre. It can be done as early as 6 weeks. It can be done even quicker than that, depending on how you want to get started. Products like our performance DNA product, Andy could probably have you running in a couple of weeks, getting started out the door, and obviously with things like workforce management, there's a lot of configuration. Things like speech analytics get a little bit more complex. Obviously, you've got to do a lot of tuning and arrangements of that product, and obviously those products get a lot more complex. But typically, you can actually get started reasonably quickly. It really does come down to sort of your requirements and the complexity of it. Yeah.
So a proof of concept or something like that would be something that people could talk to you about?
Yeah, absolutely. And Andy can talk about the timings of proof of concept. So I believe they're super quick at the moment as well.
Yeah, if you're looking at things like understanding capability or benchmarking capability across your centres, because a lot of people, they don't know what they don't know, organisations. So to be able to just understand where's our current capability right now in the business and where should we be spending our attention to close gaps and things, looking at a kind of a 4 to 6 week period will have let us identify gaps, identify where capability needs are, and even start to help close those gaps within a 6-week period. So it's really very, very quick.
Fantastic. One of the things that, or one of the terms that is I'll say is relatively new, is workforce engagement management, which is where the human factors are.
Yep.
It addresses the human factors. Have you seen anybody implement WEM rather than just focusing, on optimization, which is one of the outcomes?
Yeah, plenty of organisations across the globe. I would probably 30 to 40% of our customers that interact with us now are talking to us about engagement. Not talking to us. They're still obviously absolutely interested in the existing optimization piece, but now it's about how do I bring more employee engagement to the picture? Can we get mobility? Can they call an IVR and tell us that they're sick? Can they text us and tell us that they're sick? Can they do training while they're on the train coming to work? Those sorts of elements really are getting a lot of interest across nearly all regions, especially in Australia, especially in places like the US, with our sort of more forward thinking in terms of their approaches. We really are getting a lot of that. It does vary. I think that engagement means a lot different things to different people, and different organisations see engagement very differently. It typically reflects back on their HR policies and also how their corporate structure. We've been doing some work with a very, very modern, only a few years old, quite large software organisation who I won't be able to name, but obviously they're very young in terms of their lifestyle. They've turned around to us and said, this workforce planning thing, why do I need to do it? Why can't my people just sort themselves out? Why can't my employees just schedule themselves? Why do I need a workforce planner? Why do I need to do things like scheduling? Why can't they just self-schedule? So we're seeing a big range of people who want lots of control, all the way through to I don't really care what happens with my people. Let them manage it, make sure that the system can control that. And I think we've got a lot of different organisations and a lot of different factors there, and typically we tackle that one by one.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, are you seeing any examples of people that have gone, and I'm going to say from the more traditional command and control type environment, going to the staff members, I guess, being treated like they're adults, and let's face it, we employ adults with intelligence. What are you seeing as being the biggest stumbling block in making that transition, or what's the biggest hurdle?
The biggest hurdle is actually the change in the operational processes internally. The employee adoption is usually very easy. One of the other challenges that they typically face is things like EPA rules. So in Australia, obviously, enterprise bargaining agreements are a thing. It can be really hard to unwind those. It can be operationally to adjustments to those, so that you allow employees to text themselves in sick, for example. So it's typically more operational than it is actually technical, and it's typically more less about the employee and more about the business and just about how they actually want to go about it. Seems to be the biggest barrier. We have seen a lot of customers make that shift. We've especially seen customers go from that really sometimes very heavy-handed command and control, adherence scores down to the minute and all those sort of bits and pieces, through to being a complete flexible environment. And we've seen them prosper as organisations just generally, but more importantly, a lot of the feedback that they've got from their employees is that it's a much happier environment to work in.
I think, Fiona, as well, just to add to that, I think a lot of organisations look at this. I mean, the different sections we talk through, they look at that and think, wow, that's a big take on. But actually, when you break it down, companies can dip their toe. They don't have to do everything in one big push. And I think being able to work through what the journey looks like of starting to really invest in employee engagement and doing it a part at a time, and the more you do, the better it becomes. That's something that's something really important rather than trying to do a big, massive bang change, because you know that in itself is sometimes hard to adopt.
Fantastic. Well, with that, we're 1 minute to the hour and we don't have any more questions. So on behalf of Auscontact, can I thank both Cameron and Andy and Genesys as the national silver sponsor for so generously sharing their knowledge and understanding. Could I suggest all of you, unless you've got the pop-up blocked, complete the exit survey to get the slides and recording, get a call to learn more, or of course, what I would recommend, all of the above. I know Andy's looking forward to hearing from as many people as possible or reaching out to as many of you as possible. Andy and Cameron, any closing comments?
Yeah, so we're always interested in new ideas, and we're actually looking for customers and looking for companies that are interested in talking to us about innovations around AI. If you are interested or you know someone who is interested, please reach out to us at wem.ai@genesys.com. And that email will come directly through to me and my product management team, and we'll be happy to reach out to you, engage with you some of the innovations that we're working on as well.
Thank you. Well, with that, I wish everybody a wonderful rest of their day, wherever you happen to be. And thanks once again to Cameron and Andy for being so generous with their time, and for Cameron staying up late where he is.
Thank you. No problem. Thanks, Fiona. Have a great day, guys.